Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're talking national development and our collective and shared vision for the country. And we are joined by Mr. Howard Mitchell, attorney at law, former president of the private sector organization. And we're trying to tap into Mr. Mitchell's brain, if you will, on some of his positions. But I think we have to go back to the 2023 banquet because you said some things that to date, the Jamaica Gleaner keeps making reference to some of those quotes in the writing of their articles. So let's start with a conversation of attitudes and values and that social re-engineering, as we call it.
Yes.
What exactly does that entail, and how do we talk about it within the educational setting and so on?
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Oh, good. First of all, it is apparent to me that over the maybe past 50 years, 50 years or so, the society has changed. Clearly, external and internal forces have changed the relationships within the society. So it's not that I am proposing that we go back to the days of Howdy and Tenki and all of that. It's that I am saying that I don't think as Jamaicans we have a clear idea codified in some way and established as to what our functional values and attitudes should be if we want a civilized society. And I would like to extract that so that what I am proposing and what I think has been taken up to some extent by civil society is what are our values and attitudes in the 21st century? What are the positive ones? What are the negative ones? How do we attempt to design and shape these responses, these values and attitudes in a way that will image a society that is uniquely Jamaican and works for us? I don't know if we have that kind of concept in mind. I think we just a galang day-to-day hand to mouth. So and I think that's not useful for a society that is maturing and that is in a very difficult and challenging global circumstance.
Well, as you talk about the social reengineering, we have heard pronouncements from our education minister about a reintroduction of, for example, a civics curriculum in our educational facilities. And I know you would have mentioned that there are some gaps in our educational system as well. Is this reintroduction a good first step, or what else would you think we should introduce in our education
Well, the
system?
first step I would like to take is for us to understand that we have a democratic country and we elect a government to represent us, but that's not where the connection stops. There is a feedback loop, an involvement circle that must be maintained and nurtured. So all well and good, and much thanks to the Ministry of Education, the Minister of Education for moving, but it has to be something that is of the people, and the people must be involved in it. And what nurtures and supports a democracy is an aware and enlightened populace. So that where I start from is, do not tell me that you are teaching civics in some of the schools. Which of the schools? Why those? Why not all? And what does civics mean? Right? As far as I'm concerned, there are some basics. The Constitution in a simplified form, in a way that the teachers can use it to explain to the children, should be there from primary school. Similarly, the Charter of Human Rights. Similarly, an explanation of what our government is about. I hear you talking about local government and not to conflate local government with representative MPs and stuff like that. I don't think, I mean, I have been around this block for 73 years and I have a tertiary degree, and not being elitist, I'm just saying, I don't even understand sometimes what that relationship has become. I don't know how it works. I know how it is supposed to work. But that is what I'm talking about when I speak about civics, that our citizens must be aware of and acquainted with the democratic mechanisms in the society that allow them to realize their full potential.
And just to say, I've had the opportunity to look at the civics curriculum, and that is not it.
Well, there you go. So I'm glad you have had that opportunity, but I think many of us in the society have not, and this is what is being taught to our children, and only some of our children. And how is that right?
Yeah.
On what basis is that determined?
Yes, as you mentioned that, to segue a little bit to constitutional reform, I've had the opportunity just last night to speak to some 35 students, and I asked the question, how many of you are aware of the constitutional reform process? Not the issues, no, just the process. And only 6 students raised their hands. Only 6 of some 35. So what can we do differently? Because right now we're told that a bill will be tabled sometime in April, thereabout, from the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs to replace the monarchy with our own version of a president. We don't know what that version is at the moment. But what are your thoughts on the process?
I want to just point out to you, first of all, that the fact that 6 of your students raised their hands and said they know about it don't mean they know about it. I mean, they think they know about it.
Yeah, but I clarify that as well.
But look, the whole issue of constitutional reform, a constitution to me is such a sacred instrument, right? That if reform of it is going to take place, it mustn't take place behind my back, above my head, or out of my range. It must take place in a context where I understand fully as a citizen what is going on. And again, I said to you that I've been around here for a considerable period of time, and I am not even sure of what are the full implications of Jamaica becoming a republic. So in those circumstances, how can you expect somebody who doesn't have as much time as I do to read and fast and inquire into people's business, to them looking about a living, how can they participate in that? And if they don't participate in that, is it meaningful?
Yeah.
So I think it's a serious process that cannot be undertaken lightly. Now, I know that there are political implications. Everything in this country is political. So when you open your mouth, you're either attacking one party or the other. Yeah. Well, as long as people realize that I'm attacking both parties, I'm fine, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that if you're undertaking it for political reasons, then first of all, you're missing the point, because a lot of people don't even give it any value. So you're not going to get a vote because of it. And I bet you explain it.
Yes. You know, we are finalizing our position at JFJ, and we saw the input of Professor Trevor Monroe. And you know, Prof, it's going to be very diligent in his feedback. And he said to us that we ought to be careful what recommendations we're making, not just at JFJ, but as civil society. For example, electing a prime minister directly. And he said you may be swapping out one thing because it sounds good, but what are the implications for that prime minister, for power and authority? So these are some of the things. Who is breaking these things down? So my question to you, Mr. Mitchell, what can be done differently? So we talk about the gaps and what needs to be done for people to be more involved, but what is the how? What would be your recommendation?
All right, the how of it is, and there are no quick fixes to this thing. What gone bad from a morning, you can't just fix it at 4 o'clock. But first of all, we need to start treating the Constitution as if it were the document that we say it is, the founding charter of our country. And everybody needs to be acquainted with it. It needs to be published in the newspaper on a Sunday with notes, and the media need to be invited to contribute to dialogue that explains it, first of all, before you talk about what you want to change it to and why you want to change it to something else.
Yes.
Okay? And yes, we've had town hall meetings. Some. I don't know how many. But in a society like this, a town hall meeting, this is not North America where people have a lot of disposable time, Man, I look for them food, right? So I think in a society like this, you have to do more outreach than that. And you have to generate some interest, because people not that interested in it. I don't get that feeling.
Not a bread and butter issue for people.
It's not a bread and butter issue, but it's a critical matter bearing on their lives.
Yes.
So I don't think it's something that can be rushed. First of all, that's what I say. The how, we need to spend time on the education of our people as to the content and meaning and implications of the existing constitution and the changes that we wish to input. And it will take time. And it needs to be a whole of society effort, not just the state. If the state is going to prepare a formula for a cake, I may not want to eat it.
You know, Jade, Prof gave another feedback that at the end of the day, we have our own objective here at JFJ. We're a human rights organization. But you're right, the state can't be the one leading on it, because you think the state going to be telling you that if you keep this power here, this is the implication of it. Both political parties have their own vested interest in maintaining power. I think Bruce Golding was one of the few who departed from willingly giving up some of the power vested in the Constitution.
The whole idea of a democracy is the interplay of dynamic forces, right? The church may have a particular view on the Constitution that I may disagree with. I, as commerce, for instance, may disagree with. You, the church may say, the Constitution may say you can't run and do any business on Sunday. I am going to take a position on that. Is that the implications of a republic, that you give greater power to some one person to say that?
Yes.
We need to know these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
But when we come back, I do want to talk about, well, a little bit about your commentary on the assault on agencies, and how we can respond as civil society and the agencies themselves in such a manner that can actually produce some fulsome defense.
Sure.
So when we come back from the break. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing our agenda for national development, and we are joined by Mr. Howard Mitchell, attorney at law and former PSOJ president. And prior to the break, Mr. Mitchell, we wanted to get your perspective. I know that you made a statement about assault on certain agencies. Firstly, I'd want you to, I'm sure our viewers know because we've discussed it on the show, but I'd want you to give us an example of the kind of assault that you're referring to, and how best, in your opinion, could these agencies respond?
Okay, let me start from the base that if it is a democracy that we want, we need to understand that democratic societies are held together by institutions, by certain institutions. They're held together by the interplay of the state, commerce, which is the market, and civil society. And people have this idea that civil society is some kind of entity existing off in the stars. It's the combination of social elements, including individual citizens when they come together as a group. So that we have to understand that you cannot, in fact, have a organized society without organized institutions. Even if it is not a democratic society, there are institutions that hold it together. So if we decide that we do not want a particular institution, you have to look at it to see, if you remove it, what will that do to the democracy of your society? And therefore, my conclusion is, looking at some of the internecine warfare that has been going on between the state and some of the organs it itself created, is either indicative of a particular motive or insanity. Okay? You cannot establish, for instance, the Act for the Integrity Commission and then complain that the very act that you have established is being used to beat you with. You didn't know it was going to be used for that? And if that is the case, then the forum exists for you to bring a bill to amend it, stating why it is not constructive or conducive to the maintenance of democratic ideals for you to go out a road and slang the institution that you yourself have established, you voted for, right? So that I gave the Integrity Commission as an example. No, the Integrity Commission is not perfect. It has made some mistakes.
Yes.
But that's the way to respond to it is within the appropriate democratic forum, right? Similarly, there are institutions such as the courts, which we are undermining because we are not giving them the resources to give the people justice, right? And either that effect, that impact, is incompetence, malice or insanity, right? Because it is obvious.
You know, we made I remember being in Parliament, Jade and we made a recommendation following on the 1995 report. For example, that certain institutions, such as the Integrity Commission, as was promised when it was the Office of the Contractor General, to be constitutionally entrenched. And we recall watching PBC with a joint select committee sitting, and several parliamentarians laughed. They scoffed at the recommendation and just said, no, won't be considered, moving right along. So I don't know how can the public be a little more informed and engaged and enraged at some of that type of posture.
Well, over the years, I have been fairly consistent on my concerns, expressing my concerns about the Parliament. Parliament is the highest court in the land. It is the center and repository of justice. It is the place where every citizen looks to defend the rights and to provide the structure that which the citizen can operate peacefully and with security. And Parliament is being treated as if it was a dancehall lawn. And it can only say to me that clearly the standard of our political representatives is representative of the lowest common denominator of the society we have become. And we need to fix that, because it only have one way to go and it's not up. So I agree with you that when you see that reaction for your proposal, instead of a reasoned discussion, then it must cause a concern in your hearts as young people that everything is being taken for a joke. It's a parody. And if that's the case, then why are we attempting to carry out the sham? Why we don't just turn into a savage, chaotic society, which is not the case?
Yeah, you know, Mr. Mitchell, you also said something, just to continue on that thought process. What do we expect from our parliamentarians? And there was an article in the Gleaner that spoke about that, you know, the salaries gone right up. I hope our salaries can reach that level one day, but they're gone right up. And what are we getting in return? I think in the article it made mention, we have it here, about the number of legislation and so on that were passed. Some 18 in 2021, 2022 period. And only 3 were actually passed, based on your recollection. 5 initiated and 9 nothing. I'm not sure for 2023.
Yeah, I don't have the 2023 numbers, but the Gleaner spoke to it in an editorial today, yes. I think. They corrected some of my numbers. They look at it differently. I came up with 3, they come up with 6. But the fact is that I don't care what it is, right?
It's still not encouraging.
It's not encouraging. Our Parliament is not justifying its existence as a legislative body. And look, I have been close to politics, very close. I mean, I started out with politics in 1968. Some of these people who complain that I'm a PNPR, that I'm a Labourite, don't understand my experience with this thing. I really don't. The political party, to me, is a means to an end to make my country work. And if they are not working to do that, then I don't want any of them. Okay? So when I cuss JLP and PNP same way. And the fact is that the processes in Parliament. Look at this undisclosed wealth orders thing. The Prime Minister 3 years ago.
Yes, and it's one of those things that the Crime Monitoring Oversight Committee,
right.
CMOC, is
promise
monitoring.
That legislation. No, you make a commitment, but my understanding is Cabinet don't even approve the drafting instructions. So we're not taking it seriously. Look, there are a lot of pressing matters before the Parliament. So I understand if something slip or whatever, but don't just treat it casually, man, and don't go to the Parliament with the limited time that you have and jump up and down and cuss bad word at each other and offer to fight people outside. That does not impress me with your performance. And as far as the salary increase is concerned, I am still waiting to see in 2024 since we are no longer paying peanuts, that we're not getting monkey. Okay, so I will be looking at the behavior and I will speak out about it as long as I have breath in my body.
Yes. And for our listeners, just to indicate, this is an important topic for JFJ because this is not a political issue. You have critical pieces of legislation, for example, the Domestic Violence Act from 2018. There's a recommendation report, and it's just late last year that we're getting a commitment that a joint select committee to review the Domestic Violence Act will be convened. You look at the Childcare and Protection Act. I made mention at the start of the program around corporal punishment. The Prime Minister himself has made a commitment from 2017. It's now 2024 start, and yet we're hearing that it is being recommended by the Violence Prevention Commission.
But even as you talk about the pieces that were not touched, even the pieces of legislation that we have engendered to change, we're not fully involved in the process. I read the report for the Childcare and Protection Criminal Justice Administration Act.
That's the mandatory minimum.
Committee, the mandatory minimum for murder review. And there were 2 members of that committee who attended no meetings at all. And it is unfathomable to me that we could have representatives in the parliament on an important piece of legislation like this, which the committee ended up recommending a life sentence for children, minimum 30 years in some cases, 50 years. So we're looking at serious sentences where 2 of our representatives did not even have input.
And for those who attended, Mr. Mitchell, I'm choosing words carefully now, but I think we have to say it. We recall watching again one of the sitting of the Joint Select Committee, and it was the penultimate sitting that you had legislators asking to clarify sections of an act that they agreed to amend.
Yes.
And I mean basic sections that one would think they would have clarified at the start of the process.
Okay. There is a syndrome that will affect human beings when they are given tasks that are much beyond their competence and they are given no tools to perform them. They tend to then treat it as not important. And so maybe let us say that is what has happened to our parliament. I put it to you that what you need to do is give them some more actual resources,
yes.
not the money, but give them people to help them with the research. Maybe, I hear about the new parliament building, but I would prefer to hear about what is in the content. What is the content?
More
what is going to go on in there? More drafting
yes.
persons, more consultants, more people to help the parliamentarians understand the bills that come in front of them, some of which will tie us up for generations to come. So I'm not sure that we are treating the business of parliament in as serious a fashion as we should, and I'm not sure that our citizens do have I think our citizens have said, listen, I can't bother with it. I'll wait until election. I'll take the money, them give me to vote, and I'll go and vote. But I'm not part of this society. That's a dangerous trend.
Or we've been told, I know you have to go in another 2 minutes, but we've been told at JFJ, why are we making much ado about nothing? Leave the government. We elect them for a particular period. Let them do the crime prevention and the crime control mechanism. So I said, when you give the government extraordinary powers, you're acting on the premise that they're going to give it back after crime is reduced. So I don't know, just last word from you. What do you say to citizens who call for El Salvador and all of these strong measures?
I'm particularly interested in some of the social media comments that have been coming at me since I've spoken. That, as you say, leave the government alone. Why you don't go mind your own business and make some more money and all of that kind of thing? Fine. I don't intend to leave the government alone because I voted for them. I voted in the last election, so I don't intend to leave them alone. I'm not going to let somebody come into my house and do what they want to do in my house simply because I opened the door to let them in. And the fact is that if we don't know by now that violence begets violence, then we're not reading our Bible and we're not learning from our experience. So as far as the El Salvador situation is concerned, I hear those arguments, I mean, you're going to lock up all these people. You're going to have, we need a new jail, by the way, but we need a new jail to accommodate the people we have in there in more humane conditions. Yes. Right? Now, if you're going to try this El Salvador situation in Jamaica. Let me encourage you to read the history of Jamaica and realize that Jamaica is not some Roman Catholic colonialist history. It is a set of bad people. So if you really want to start that game, I invite you to think about it twice. I don't think you can lock up our people as easily as you can lock up people who have been accustomed to hundreds of years of Christian propaganda.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell. We appreciate you, and we'll talk. All right? Great. We take the break, and then we return with some more. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We were joined earlier by Mr. Howard Mitchell, attorney at law and former president of the PSOJ. And we discussed quite a bit because we believe at the start of the year it's important to have dialogue on things in terms of our expectation of parliamentarians as our legislators, how we balance those roles with them being members of parliament and so on. And, you know, within the context of our last discussion, there is the job description town hall being held, and I would encourage everyone to attend when those town halls are being convened, because you're going to be asking yourself the question, what do my legislators owe me? And as you answer that question, it should be recorded for a possible job description. And I know some people look at it and say, listen, we're not going to no academic exercise, but how do we hold our members of parliament accountable? Because quite frankly, the Constitution doesn't outline the very basic provisions, really. So something to think of.
You know, sure. And as we talk about town halls, and we had our discussion with Mr. Mitchell, one of the things that the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs would have been doing to push information on constitutional reform is town halls.
And there have been some improvements. Because they now have public education officers actually employed.
Yes.
So that's a start.
Okay. So there have been some steps taken. However,
I'll be the positive person beside you today.
you know, I just wanted to plug, because I looked out into the studio and saw our community and outreach engagement officer there, and we do intend to be hosting some town halls and public engagement of our own on constitutional reform, our recommendations, but just general understanding of the Constitution, as Mr. Mitchell would have said, and we would have identified already. That is a severely lacking area, and we can expect persons to contribute to our process that what the process is about, they don't even understand.
You know, I won't say when, because I may disclose who I'm speaking of. But my son and I, we were in the car, and he listened to an interview between candidates in the local government election. And I was in complete shock based on what they were articulating and how they were articulating. And my son said to me, "Mommy, these are the best of the candidates."
Wow.
No, you would have to know that 15-year-old, because he was there listening to music. Apparently the music paused, and he just said, "Oh, no, let me pause that a bit longer." Because he said that the bar was apparently so low that some of what people were promising, like garbage collection, it's important.
Yes.
But it cannot be that something as basic a function of local government, this is what people are promising in 2024.
Building your campaign on a basic expectation is...
You know, and so it brings to light how can we educate the newer generation about some of these things, because again, he has the privilege of his school teaching certain things. He does history, and when I rant in the morning, he's forced to listen, not by choice, he's forced to. So he's a little bit more informed than the other teenagers. So how do we get that type of education so the newer generation can shift the needle in terms of accountability?
And you know, as you talk about garbage collection, one of the things that I think is a challenge for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the speed at which some things can no longer be points for accountability. I remember late
Like
last
water.
year.
Water. You just get water in one constituency, you come and make it on news. You should be ashamed.
But late last year we saw a discussion around a complete privatization of the National Solid Waste Management Agency.
And it's not the first, because there are some services within government that conversations have always been had whether or not we should privatize. The question I always ask, at what cost?
Yeah.
Let's look at JPS, for example.
Absolutely. So that is why I think it is so important for us to encourage this level of accountability.
Yeah.
Because it forces us to put those systems in place that allow the agencies to stay under government control rather than shifting it to privatization and ridding ourselves of that responsibility. So hopefully we can encourage some more participation. And another thing Mr. Mitchell said that really resonated with me was about just the way our participatory processes are being used, and it is discouraging on occasion. I know we talked about the Integrity Commission Act and a submission that we would have made in relation to making it a constitutional body, something that was expected of the body. And to find we weren't the only persons that made that recommendation, and to hear the response from the persons considering that recommendation, it can make you question.
The minister laughed.
Yes.
Then scoffed.
It makes you question how participatory the processes that are supposed
really is.
that are there to encourage you. So
and to be clear for the listeners, we recognize that in some instances as civil society we may get certain things wrong.
Yeah.
Because these legislation, these different pieces, they're quite complex in several ways. In some instances you may have a short time span within which to respond. So we will make mistakes, but I can tell you on this one we didn't. Yeah? But beyond that, however, and Mr. Mitchell said it shouldn't be a scoff as the response. It ought to be a sober review, especially when you know that you're being streamed live.
yes.
It is disrespectful to the process. I know sometimes the chair, Minister Edmund Bartlett, has had to intervene
Yes.
with his members to indicate that, listen, let's give people the respect they're here, let's listen, and it will be up for discussion. I remember several instances he has had to say it, whether it was JFJ presenting or other agencies. So, and Mr. Mitchell said it as well, the crisis in leadership and how we prepare parliamentarians to be parliamentarians. My 15-year-old has said to me, Mommy, there are certain comments that you yourself can't make.
Yes.
You're a mother, plus you represent JFJ. And he says that the same principle applies for our leaders, that you don't have the latitude of saying certain things and just regurgitating or just spitting out whatever comes to at the thought. So what do we expect of our leaders in terms of the type of training that they receive upon being elected to the House? Mr. Mitchell said it, for those who don't watch Parliament, yes, there was an actual come outside and let me show you what powers I have. People were inviting the other to come out and fight in the House.
Yes.
So what do we expect of our legislators when the pace of legislative making process is so slow? How do we demand accountability when, as citizens, we're not keeping abreast of the situation? So we have the power as citizens, as members of an electorate, but how are we enforcing it? If we're not aware of anything. And I can tell you, JFJ, we will be rising to the challenge put to us by Prof. Monroe, that it is not enough for us as civil society to say that we're not happy with leadership, we're not happy with the constitutional reform process. He says that, unfortunately so, more is expected of us in terms of how we demand that accountability. And JFJ, we're going to have to be doing the work. And let me say, this town hall meeting that you referred to earlier, it's not on any donor listing. It's not anything that donor is saying we must do. As a team, we sat, we realized what was happening, we recognized the inadequacy of the constitutional reform process in terms of public engagement. We also recognize that government is not going to be telling you why you ought not to be agreeing with not moving ahead with the CCJ, because that has become a political issue. Government is not going to be telling you to take away some of the powers of, for example, the Prime Minister or the executive branch, because they all want to retain such power to do what they will. So who tells you that? Who breaks it down to you? Who explains to you these provisions so that we can make sober decisions? I think that's a gap. And to Prof. Monroe, we will be taking on that challenge, I can tell you, because a body must do that.
Yes.
You know, because again, Jade, I tell you, we've had this conversation with several people in workshop settings, in community settings, and them say, make government do what them do. Crime rate high, mandatory minimum necessary. But when you really probe, there is a genuine lack of understanding of these matters. So, yeah, necessary work. Yeah,
Absolutely, and we'll continue to do so throughout this year. We'll keep you all informed as we continue.
Yes.
Let's Talk Justice every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Now we have a winner for a trivia question, which was, what piece of legislation governs our states of emergency? The winner was Asa Saji, back early in the year. But one of our normal listeners and responders on our trivia questions, the answer for the question was the Emergency Powers Act. And they were correct. So we will reach out with your prize via social media, and thank you for participating.
Just a last word on participation. For those who are listening in, please make contact via our WhatsApp number, which is 876-239-7583, or via social media, to indicate to us some of the human rights issues that you would want us to discuss on the program, to indicate to us as well who you would like to see on the program in articulating some of those positions. So another area, the human rights issues broadly and who, but also when it comes to constitutional reform, we're also inviting you to share with us what topics you would want us to go over or to better explain, because this is a public education program as well. So please keep that in mind and let us know what your thoughts are as we cater to your needs and what you want to hear from us on.
Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next week. I'm Jade Williams.
And I'm Mikkel Jackson. Take care.